Okay, so our rufflers are now clean and there's no oozy oil and they are ready to go on the machine. For the purpose of this video, because I have two rufflers, I'm not going to use my 1 5 because that's 2 settings only. If you do have the 1 5 one, it's just that little bit easier. I'm going to be using the ruffler with the 1 6 12 star, so I can show you some of the differences that it offers. Now, what we're going to do is fit it to the machine first. Make sure this is pulled back to start with. It doesn't matter what setting it's on at this point. What we're going to focus on is how we're attaching it. So obviously this is going to be attaching to the presser bar, and this is going to hook under the needle. Now I haven't threaded my machine just yet. We're going to just test out the ruffler to make sure that it's moving smoothly on the machine, and then we'll thread it up and we'll pop some fabric on. So let's see how it works first of all, and let's negotiate how it's going to go under. So let me get the right angle for you, probably about there maybe. So obviously you know that this can move up and down, so we're going to have to negotiate it around the needle. So if you come at it from this angle, focus on getting that under first, and then this part goes around the needle and then it'll engage. So let me just move around this side. Then grab your screw and we can feed that in. Now it doesn't matter what machine I put my ruffler on, there is not much clearance between the ruffler and your feed dogs, but I have a little hack that's going to help with that. So hopefully you can see that from this angle okay. I will change the camera angle in a minute. Now my presser, when I drop my presser foot, you can see there's not much movement at all, but I'm going to just leave my presser foot up for now, and we're just going to run this just on its own, just to make sure that it's running smoothly. I've got my ruffler set on every 6 stitches, so that's working quite nice. Let's bring my needle up. Now let's change this to say a number 1, and we know that that means it's going to stitch, it's going to jab every 1 stitch. So there you go, having a good old jab there. Okay, so that's my jab every 1 stitch. That's working lovely. We know that every 6 stitches is working. Excellent. Bring the needle up. Now I'm going to do it to number 12, but I know for mine I have to just angle my little blue guy up a little bit. So this should now go every 12 stitches. No, mine's still not quite happy. Let's push that in to start with. There you go. It needed a little nudge. There you go. So that does stitch every 12 stitches. Let's bring the needle up. Now, remember from the last video, when it's on the star, it means it won't jab at all. So that'll just carry on doing just a normal straight stitch. The ruffler element, our jabber, is not engaging at all. So we've given the ruffler a good oil and a good bit of maintenance. This is working quite lovely without putting any, without being stiff, which means it's not putting any undue pressure on our needle bar or our presser bar. Good, excellent. Let's take this off just for now. So it's good to just test it on your machine. Just angle that out. So let's talk fabric now. Let's have a look. So obviously this is going to jab the fabric in, which means the fabric has to be above this kind of thing. It's got to go between our jabber and this plate. It's going to go along underneath the jabber and come out at the bottom. Now this piece of blue at the bottom, it does flex, obviously, because it has to allow the fabric to feed through. And obviously this has a little bit of flex because it's jabbing and then it's coming back out. So the fabric can still slide under. And if I use my little screwdriver, you can see just that will lift. But it should be pointing down, obviously, because otherwise it won't jab. But we don't want the fabric to shift about too much, which is why we have this little tongue here. So what happens, in order to create a ruffle, let me get that in camera, we're going to put our fabric underneath that tongue, and it's always difficult trying to do this when I've only got 2 hands available to me. So the fabric's going to slide and then slide under that tongue and out the back. Okay. It's very difficult to do this without the ruffler being attached. So I'm going to show you how to feed that fabric through. So in order to ruffle a piece of fabric, it needs to go above this piece, under the tongue, back up again, under our jabber, and then it will slide out across. So I'm going to show you what happens, and this is very likely what will happen to you as well, and you'll go, oh, this is horrible. Oh, actually, well, sorry, before I put this back on, you might put your ruffler on and you drop the needle and it hits your ruffler. This tiny little screw here will adjust this blade, or it's actually the metal above the blade, just left and right, so that you can get that aligned with your needle. So if you find that it's slightly out, because the last time your ruffler was used was maybe on a different machine, you might just have to just turn that screw just to loosen it, and then just give this metal plate just a movement either to the right or to the left, just to align it with your needle. So don't be disheartened if when you put your ruffler on, it hits the side. It's just where it's been adjusted to whatever machine it used last. Okay, right, let's put this on. So from this angle, I'm just using my fingers just to negotiate this arm, and then around and under. Grab my screw and let's get that screwed in. Wow, maybe the hardest bit is just getting the screw in. Right. Okay, we're on. Now, as you've seen, I haven't got much clearance, and this is what starts to happen if you don't have much clearance with your fabric. So come out at this angle. Let me see if I can turn a little bit. So from this angle, I'm going to go under this tongue. No, that's not a very good angle for you at all, is it? Let's do a bit of twisting and see. There you go, that's a bit better. So I'm going to go, the fabric's going to go over this, but under the tongue. So best way to do it is from that angle. Lovely. And then if you pull, it will start to catch under. Now you've got it under. Problem with that is, and because our jabber has got little spikes at the end, if I try to pull that back, it's not going anywhere because it's designed to grip. But I don't want my ruffles starting halfway down the fabric. It's pointless. I want it to start at the beginning of the fabric. So you might find, like I have, There's not much movement. I can pull it this way quite easily, lovely, but that's just actually going towards the end. There's a reason for that. Obviously it's to grip the fabric, but why can't I pull this back? Even if I tried to get a screwdriver under there and just lift the fabric, for me it's still catching, which is really annoying. So let me show you why. So let's get this out the way. And I'm going to take my camera off. There. Now we have a nice good angle of the ruffler. The reason why it's getting jammed is because your feed dogs are up. Now I haven't even got my presser foot down. My presser foot is down now, and that's my presser foot when it's up. And there is still not much clearance at all. And that's because your fabric, even though it's sliding under the tongue, back up again, underneath our jabber, and then it's sliding along this blue plate, and then it's going under this piece of metal here. But that's a really tight fit because what's underneath there? The feed dogs. If I send my needle down, my feed dogs disappear. Suddenly there is flex here, which means I could slide my fabric under, this drops, and I've got a lot of clearance now to slide my fabric. Problem is, my needle's in it now, so I can't. But then if I bring my needle out the way, my feed dogs have appeared. So, what I found, option 1 is bring your needle, now obviously we haven't got it threaded yet, but if you bring your needle down enough to start engaging, but not enough to go through towards this plate, your feed dogs have dropped slightly. So let's see how that works. So my needle is, if I just roll that back, you can see there's my needle. And I've just dropped it just so the eye of the needle is just below. But the needle hasn't gone as far as going anywhere near this plate here. But that gives you a bit more clearance. So let's see how that works. This is option 1, by the way. So let me just pop my phone back on its clamp. Now let's try that again. Let's see if there's any more clearance. So, under the tongue, down, and there you go. See, that's sliding better. I can feel it's catching ever so slightly on my needle. Let's move that back. But now I've got a bit more, actually got a bit more movement, even though my jabber is still, you can hear it's slightly catching, but there's a bit more movement. I can now slide that back, and then I can bring it forward, and then I can slide that back. Doesn't that make it easier? I've got a bit of overlap on my calico, but that's okay. But that just kind of helps a bit. Once it's threaded, obviously you've got to be very careful with your needle, because if you're sticking your needle in, it's going to start engaging and picking up your bobbin threads. So might be worth just to practice with your presser foot up the optimum point just before the needle engages with the ruffler, before it goes into the bobbin plate, just so that you can get that right. Option 2, I'm going to take this off. Option 2, you are going to need an important device. You're going to need one of these. What you can do, take your presser knob thing off, and obviously there's a bit more play in how that lifts up. So if you use a Bulldog clip, and I'll show you the other angle in a minute, you can Bulldog clip that, and that might be a bit easier. Now you can see, even with the feed dogs up, oh sorry, there you go, even with the feed dogs up, there is a lot more, try and get at that, there's a lot more clearance. Let me see if I can, no, okay. But you can see there's a lot more clearance now. Okay, my needle might bang because my ruffler is not completely pinned in. But if you wanted to try and feed your fabric, because of clearance issues, if you wanted to feed your fabric through just by having it Bulldog clipped slightly higher than the screw hole, you won't have to worry about your feed dogs, because there's still, I mean, look, if I press that down, there's plenty of clearance now between your ruffler and the feed dog so that you can feed your fabric through. So that's just another option. Right, let's actually do the ruffler bit now. So let me pop you back on the bracket. We know our ruffler works, so let's see how it ruffles. I'm going to take it off completely, and I'm going to pause the video, and I'm just going to get the machine threaded up ready. Right, I have threaded up ready, and the first thing we're going to do, take our top thread. Let's just move that out the way. I'm going to take my top thread, and before I attach the ruffler to the machine, I am just going to thread, left-handed, I'm going to thread through the hole in the ruffler. It just gets it tidier to begin with. So my top thread is now threaded through. Now let's get it engaged, and let's get it attached. Hang on. Let's make sure that's nice and tight. There we go. Now I've got mine set at the star setting at the moment. It just means I know that my jabber is completely disengaged, and actually it relieves some of the pressure on the jabber so that it makes it just that little bit easier to get your fabric in. Now obviously we've seen that there isn't that much clearance between the ruffler and our feed dogs, so I'm just going to hold onto the back of the threads, and I'm just going to engage my needle just probably about there, so I can still see my needle eye, but I know that my feed dogs have dropped ever so slightly. So let's feed our fabric through. So round that tongue, slide, let's slide that under, and then we're just going to pull it back. Might have to lift these up a little bit. Now it's not quite playing, so I'm just going to lift this, put a screwdriver under just to help ease that back, because I want to try and start my ruffler at the very edge of the fabric, or as much as can be. So now let's set it for number 6, so you can see that. Let me just move my camera around a little bit so you can see it from this angle. Now I will drop my presser foot. So let's see, so my stitch length I've got just for 10 stitches per inch for now. I'm using a 99, so I can gauge my stitches. You might want to, if you don't have a gauge, if you have an older machine where it's a knob that screws in and out to adjust the stitch length, you might want to just test your stitches first just to see what you're happy with. So I've got mine set for 6 stitches per jab. So let's see how that works now. 1 jab, 2 jabs. Now what I'm going to do, you can see it from this angle, but I'm going to just take the camera off. And I'm going to hold it at this angle so that you can see what's happening. Obviously when you're stitching, you're not seeing this angle. You can see how that's jabbing the fabric. And mine caught the end, so let's put you back there so I can show you what it created. Let's get my scissors. And there we go. That's created a ruffle every 6 stitches. So let's do that again, but I'm going to actually do it now on a ruffle every single stitch, and you can see how tight that is. Now I haven't adjusted the jab of the ruffler, so you can see, let's try and do it from this. You can see how much that's jabbed in. If I take my little scissors, that's actually going in quite a bit, probably about 1/4 inch. You can see it from just about from the top. That's created a cute, nice little set of ruffles. So I'm going to engage it back into star. And I'm going to pull this out as far as it can go. Let's get some thread going, and we'll take another scrap piece of fabric. We're going to just drop that needle in just enough to drop the feed dogs a little bit, and under the tongue, under. That's it. And then, because I'm using calico, the fabric is slightly thicker, so I'm just gonna use, oh, actually it doesn't feel like my feed dogs. It's actually my needle. That's a bit more engaged than it should be. It does take about 4 hands normally to do it, and I suppose that's why people get put off using the ruffler, because it can be a bit funny, or you can just get frustrated with it, which is understandable. I was when I first started. Okay, I'm on the star setting, so I'm going to move that over to my number 1 setting, drop my presser foot, and what this should do now is jab every single stitch. So let's see how that goes. And you can see that's properly bunched up. But let's got itself a little bit caught, but that's okay. Ping. And let's get that bit of thread out of the way. So look, that's every single jab, every single stitch. Now, obviously, if you've got a very long stitch, you've changed it to a very long stitch length, it will obviously create the ruffles a little bit further apart, but mine's set at 1 stitch, 10 stitches per inch, so you can see that that is really, really tiny and would make a lovely little Barbie skirt or something. Move that out of the way. So you can see now kind of how they ruffle and the sorts of look that it can create. So let's show you on this one as well, so you can see the stitches. Now what you can do, and I'll get that set up now because I've just seen my needle unthreaded, so I'm going to pause the video, but you can start creating little effects with your ruffler by choosing when you can actually change these settings here as you go along. So I'm going to show you that now, but I'm just going to pause the video so I can get re-threaded up. Okay, so I've got it reset up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 6 stitches, ruffle every 6 stitches. I'm going to do 3 of them. There's my next ruffle, and then let's wait for my thing to disengage. Now I'm going to change it to the star setting, and I'm just going to do some straight stitching. Probably to there, and now I'm going to re-engage my 6th stitch. always gets a bit stuck because that's it, a bit more clearance. So you can, although my thread got in the way there, but you can actually have, you know, a set of 3 stitches, then some straight stitches, and then, sorry, my thread got stuck there. Let's get rid of that so that it, no, that's got jammed. So you've got, yeah, a set of 3 ruffles and then some straight stitching because we engaged the star, and then we went back to ruffling again. So that, you know, you can just have a play with the different effects that you can get with a ruffler. But I'm going to show you one more thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to ruffle some fabric on top of another piece of fabric. So to start with, we are going to need to put a piece of fabric under the ruffler completely. And again, I'm going to need to just drop my feed dogs a bit. So this is going completely under. It's not engaging at all in anything to do with the ruffler. Step 1. Now we're going to put a piece of fabric to ruffle. And just make sure that your fabric underneath doesn't go anywhere. So I'm going to keep it at 6 stitches. Let's drop the presser foot. Make sure that your fabric underneath, that's completely underneath the ruffler, doesn't shift. Presser foot's down. So what it's going to do is going to stitch this blue fabric normal, because it's just going underneath the ruffler completely, but the top piece of fabric is going to ruffle. So let's see how that works. It's not ruffling the fabric underneath, it's only ruffling the top fabric. And then what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that this piece of fabric just stays close to the ruffler and doesn't naturally push away. Let's get to the end. Now obviously when a piece of fabric is being ruffled, it shortens, it just naturally shortens. So as you can see, let me just wheel back a bit. So my top piece of fabric has been ruffled, but my blue fabric hasn't. Now if I turn that over, ooh la la, now it's starting to look very neat because everything is underneath. But when I'm folding it this way, you now have your ruffles attached to the piece of fabric. Very handy. Now we can do something even more cooler. Keep that flipped so that it's the wrong side. Now what I want to do is attach fabric on this side as well. So oops, sorry. So let's do the same thing again. Now obviously this piece of fabric is quite buckled. Well, it's on its way to being ruffled. So I'm going to slide another piece of fabric under, drop my needle ever, let's go put it on the star end so it's out of the way. Another piece of fabric under as much as I can wiggle it. And I want to ruffle this side now. Now obviously my fabric isn't the right lengths, but it's just to give you an example of, you know, the types of things that a ruffler can do. This piece of fabric is going to be even trickier because it's already kind of part buckled, part ruffled up anyway. So that's not actually engaged that much, but it should be enough to start me off. So I'm going to do my 6 stitches again, my 6 thingies again. Pop that back where it should. Drop the press foot, Sam, idiot. That's So it's taken the first ruffle. So what I'm making sure now is that this is going to try and follow this other fabric as much as possible. A bit like sewing on a curve. Oh, that's gone a little bit funky. Stop that there. In fact, I'm going to change it to the star just so I can finish stitching this fabric underneath this blue fabric. So let's have a look how that looks now. So you can see that I've attached this ruffle piece of fabric to both sides. But if I turn it over, oh, it didn't quite catch. But if I turn it over, you now have a nice piece of rufflage going on in between two pieces of fabric. Again, just like any other attachment, it takes time. This is actually called a French puffin effect. And you can do this with a much narrower piece. I mean, you can see that, you know, I haven't quite attached it there. But that's the sort of ruffled effect that you can start getting with a ruffler, which is quite beautiful, actually. If you were attaching two pieces, you'd have to kind of try and gauge it or give yourself enough fabric so that you can trim down afterwards. I mean, if I trimmed there and here, oh, look, that looks amazing. Just don't look at the top bit, but I can then trim that down. And then I've got a nice piece of ruffled fabric. So let me take this fella off for now. There we go. So don't be afraid to use the ruffler. Have a bonding session with him just to get used to, obviously, you know, keep him maintained, keep him, give him a drop of oil every once in a while, give him a good clean. If you find after a couple of days and you go to him and you can still see a bit of muck, then just give that a wipe down and just have a play with the sorts of effects you can do. And you can, I mean, I'm just using, even for this video, I'm just using old pieces of calico just to give myself, you know, just enough familiarization with the ruffler, because then I can look back at all these little samples and it gives me inspiration to use the ruffler on a bigger project. But by having these little samples handy, it helps you to learn kind of, you know, what each one is. So if I had a fabric pen, I could just write on this little bit to say this is using, you know, a ruffle every 1 stitch. That's what it looks like. That's a ruffle every 6 stitches. This is ruffling every 6 stitches, and then using the star setting, I do a straight stitch and then a few more ruffles. And then obviously this is using six stitches per ruffle, but I've attached 2 pieces of fabric to it. So just have some fun with it. But I hope this video has just showed you just how well, what you can do with a ruffler, and, you know, some examples of what it starts to look like. But I hope it's helped. See you later. Bye.